want to start to raise that curiosity with the parent and the child about, like, it seems like things aren't going the way they used to be. What other things are you guys considering? If that feels appropriate within your role. But again, I don't know how much it is your job to do that unless it feels like this is really, really problematic. They're not going to school. That's a huge red flag. They are engaging in really risky behaviors, huge behavior change from who they used to be. Those are things I might bring up to the parent if I was seeing it. Yeah, but I think for the most part, I wouldn't imagine that you got, maybe I'm wrong, I don't know what your experience is like, you can tell me, but I wouldn't imagine that you have to make too many referrals. But being able to support that if that's something that the child or the parent is bringing up. Yeah.
I once had a student in high school that, she had won awards in middle school, and then in high school her playing changed so much, and her attitude changed. And mother confided that she was having problems with her stepfather, and she had actually moved out and was living with a friend.
Wow.
Now, how do I, as a piano teacher, teach her music and piano without adding to her stress level?
That's a great question. That's a great question. So I think, again, it's an individual thing, but I think there is this impulse to protect, right? And you care about your students. You don't want to add to their stress, and that can be a good instinct, but also let's think about the fact that we think of piano as one of those mastery activities that is so good for them and so good for their mental health.
However, the student viewed it as yet another stress level.
Of course, it's another stressor, for sure. So I think the best thing you can do is say, I think that piano being in your life will be a good thing. Let's collaborate about what way that can be in your life right now. What feels, and I would say that you're going to have to advocate for it more than they are in that moment, because they're going to be in that avoidance pattern, stepping back from everything. That doesn't mean you push really, really, really hard for them to be more stressed, because I can understand that impulse to not want to add to the burden, but just say, I'm here, I want to be, I want to keep piano in your life in any way we possibly can. Maybe that means to a lesser extent than it used to be, but I do think some level of practice and taking on pieces where you're going to have to learn something and push yourself is going to make you feel confident and build your competence in other areas. But at the end of the day, it has to be up to you. So again, some kind of conversation about collaborating to come to some, negotiation, I guess, over what is she willing to even buy into for herself of, like, yes, I'm going to do this hard thing, not because my teacher's making me, because that's going to have less impact, but because she in some way values it. And in the short term, sometimes I hold that for them and I say, maybe it doesn't feel super helpful to you right now, but I think it could be, so I can hold that hope for you in terms of this being beneficial. Let's just try it for 2 weeks, maybe whatever your window is, and we're going to pick this piece that you and I agree on that's outside of your comfort zone, but not so much that you're going to collapse under it, and you're going to practice it even when you don't want to, and we're going to come back next time and we're going to discuss in what moments that feel like it was something that only contributed stress, and what moments did it contribute something more positive in your life, like mastery or confidence building, or feeling like you had a distraction from these other horrible things going on in your life right now. But yeah, I think that that's a case-by-case situation, but that would be sort of the orientation I had in the back of my mind, is how can I collaborate with them to keep them hooked in some way? Yeah, just behind you.
Well, I'm going through this conversation right now with the student who, high school student, anorexic, very depressed, and after 2 years of great behavior change, quit piano at the end of the summer. And I ran into the mom and found out that the person also quit school. So was sitting home. Okay. And at the mother's suggestion, I wrote her, and I said, I wonder how things are going, and I really miss you. And within minutes, she wrote me back, said, well, I really miss you too. So we arranged within about 4 or 5 days, she was at my house for a lesson. She had 2 lessons in a row, and then I got another email saying, well, we've decided that we should do once a month. because it's too much stress. So we are still in this,
Yes. And it's a dance almost. I see you doing this. It's
Yeah.
this dance between re-engagement and avoidance, because avoidance is the thing that has worked in order of feeling better in the moment all her life, but then it doesn't work long term because then she feels probably isolated and unhappy. So I would say meet her where she's at, and like you're doing, keep reminding her by modeling the things that she misses about it, even though some of those things are hard. Yeah, maybe you had something.
Thank you. This was such a wonderful, informative presentation. I just have a question about handling parents. Well, big topic, I know. But working with a 6-year-old who clearly is demonstrating some anxiety, sometimes is afraid to fail and things like that. But then the parent gets so anxious and keeps like interfering because they're afraid of the kid's behavior and maybe they're going to do the wrong thing and say the wrong note. So I think the parent's anxiety is honestly getting in the way of the teaching, and I'm just nervous to, have that conversation.
Yeah, I would say that is something that we see across all domains, especially with the younger kids, but it can happen up until they're 18 or 25, right? Is what to do when the parent's anxiety prevents the child from overcoming their own anxiety, because maybe it is understandable that they're anxious, but they might be willing to try hard things if they were separated from that force that was saying, oh, no, we can't do that. This is, again, I would give you different advice if you were all clinicians, but I don't know that it's your role to step in and talk to the parent about their anxiety. So the best thing that I can do is encourage you to think about what you are the expert in that room, and feel empowered in that domain. Because the parent is probably feeling anxious because they don't also know what this dynamic is supposed to be, what their child is really supposed to be capable of. So some education about, how the child should be, what behaviors they should be seeing, or what's normal in that situation, or even if this is hard, what you would expect growth-wise. In a way that's not calling out their anxiety, but just leaning on your own expertise, because that would probably make the parent feel more comfortable, because now, oh, okay, you've got this, right? I don't have to over-control this situation. And a big part of that can also be like, well, we expect Johnny to make a ton of mistakes, and that's a great way for him to learn. So I think using your own expertise is going to help you feel confident in what you're saying, and it's also going to make the parent feel a little bit like they can let go, hopefully. Yeah, that's always one of the trickier ones. Yeah.
I have an experience with a student, and this is a question: could I have done any more? So what happened was a student had been practicing pretty regularly, and then there was a huge change. Was doing nothing, was kind of humming during the lessons, just not doing anything. Long conversations with the parent, and she was always making excuses for him. And then she said, the school psychologist thinks that he should come and talk to her. I said, oh, that sounds like a really good idea. She said, oh no, he's just lazy. So then what wound up happening was he wound up totally acting out and being arrested, and this will follow him for the rest of his life. So sad. So I felt I'm out of my realm. What more could I have done?
Yeah, so the answer to your question, should you have done anything more? No, right? That's not your job. And you were there for the child, you talked to the parent, you gave them your concerns, and then you took the bid, and they said, someone suggests the psychologist, and you reinforced that without having been the one to bring it up. And bad things happen sometimes. So that sucks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I have a student that does not want to play piano, and he doesn't sit on the bench, starts walking around, running and drawing things on the table, and he has really strict parents. There are times that I'm kind of in between if she is just being a kid, he's 10, or he has some attention problem, because also at the assessments of RCM, I was told that even at the exam he was talking to the jury all the time and not playing. So
Yeah, it's tricky because
it's really hard to diagnose something.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'm not even sure, maybe we should not diagnose something because then they will believe that they have a problem that they can't solve. Maybe they're just being a kid, so it's really hard.
Well, it's also an issue of motivation, right? If the kid has no interest in piano, then those behaviors may not happen at school, but are going to happen in any piano-based setting, right? If it's just not that important to him. And the question of whether he should be diagnosed, certainly you should not have to diagnose him, but that's a bigger question of this, a question of, you know, what pros and cons, what are the advantages and disadvantages for a 10-year-old who does have ADHD getting a diagnosis. And if he is truly severe, I would say the advantages outweigh the disadvantages, because then he can get the help he needs to learn better in whatever setting he's in. So children who go undiagnosed with things like ADHD can actually really miss out on learning because they're unable to focus and pay attention, but with a lot of the supports that they can get both behaviorally and sometimes medically, they are able to learn, and I think that, so although there is this concern of, you know, are they going to use this as a crutch and just an excuse to not learn things, I think there's also this danger of, are we going to let children slip through the cracks when they have a true deficit in their ability to function, when we know there are ways to help them. So anyway, I don't know how that helps your child, because again, I don't think that's your role to diagnose him, but I do think talking with the parents about, is this something that they see in school as well, and how you could, this would be my way, and it's like, I've been noticing this in piano, do they talk about this in school? Do you know what really works for him there? And that would be your way in to think about, like, how can you help him in the piano environment? Or it plants the seed in the parent's mind of, you know, maybe there need to be more supports in place to help him either function in piano, or maybe that starts to help them realize he's not that interested in this, and this is not something that's going to be beneficial for him.
Yeah. What are some good, healthy incentives? You know, and maybe if you could briefly, like, by age, because like high school, like, you know, an iPod, I'm not going to do, you know what I mean? Like,
So incentives, the most important thing is that they're motivating to the person. So I think the problem that comes up the most is when we try and prescribe the incentive and tell them what they should have, because the danger you're going to run into is that that doesn't motivate them, and then they aren't going to do that behavior anymore than if they hadn't been incentivized. And then, of course, right, how do you find something that's motivating, that's not expensive or completely out of proportion with the behavior, and that's appropriate for their age? And so usually I lean more, especially with older kids, towards experiences or things that they can do for themselves that are inherently rewarding. So that might be something like, what do I do with my teenage girls? Well, I mean, it's maybe too cliche, but I'll say, like, okay, you enjoy taking some time to paint your nails. Make that something that you don't get to do until, right? So that's the really hard part about rewards and incentives. They have to be contingent. If you're going to get the bowl of ice cream anyway, it's not going to be motivating to do. So they have to kind of buy into this idea of now it's an if-then thing. That's what I do with the older ones. I kind of make them responsible in some ways, if they're able to, for their own rewards. And then with younger ones, you have to be responsible because they don't have the self-control to not give themselves the ice cream. But it can be smaller things, right, that they find rewarding, that would be maybe experiences or special time with mom or dad, or they get, oftentimes I'll do something easy like they get to pick dinner one night, so they're picking their favorite dinner, things like that. But sometimes it can just be about praise too, for some kids. That can be really effective, and thinking through ahead of time what praise they're going to give themselves, maybe what praise mom and dad can give, things like that. So it doesn't have to be a physical thing.
I used to make practicing part of the children's allowance.
I love that.
Well, except that it became a negative, because of course they didn't practice, and then I'd have to say, well, you don't get. And that's what ended up happening until I dropped the whole thing. It was too hard for me to keep track of.
Well, right, and yeah, you don't want to end up being responsible for communicating to the parents about their discipline at home.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I would say that would have to be something that the parents decide it's important that they practice, and then they are monitoring it and giving allowance. But yeah, that's not your responsibility.
So obviously my children didn't buy into this.
No.
You know, they didn't care enough, or maybe I didn't offer them enough money, I don't know. But, you know, they just didn't buy into it.
So the other thing about rewards that can be tricky is they have to be pretty immediate. Especially when you're trying to change a behavior that's very difficult. So when parents are like, well, if you do this, then next week this, and then maybe sometimes the thing next week doesn't even happen, that's going to be a recipe for disaster. So if it's something, if you're going to do it daily, if it's practicing, parents can give them a chip, maybe if it's a younger kid, and those, you earn a certain number, and then you get to do something with that, it's something physical that they can see, those type of things can be helpful. Yeah, reward immediately and concrete. Yeah.
As a teacher, and I think we all face this, we're on this really narrow line. On the one hand, we probably see them more than anybody except for their parent.
Yeah.
Because I might see a kid 14 years, every week, you know. Who else does that except for their mom and dad? So I sense before other people, sometimes before their mom and dad, that something is going on. On the other hand, and I'm a social worker in addition to pianist, so I have that bent to go too far over on the other side. A friend of mine who's a social worker said to me once when I was really getting wound up about a very problem student, she said, you are not her parent, you are not her social worker, she needs a place of relief where she doesn't have to think about all that. She needs music. Just be a piano teacher. And I've thought about that for many, many years, and in other cases, that's my role.
Yeah, I love that. Again, I think that is definitely what you should lean on, because you can still model healthy behaviors without taking on the responsibility of taking care of them outside of their music, because that could really weaken your ability to help them as a teacher. But then, like you said, I think that was so beautiful, that give them music. When you start to focus on all that other stuff, then maybe that gets diluted, and this is the good thing you're giving them no matter what. Yeah, let's do one more.
Although, on the other side, I do have to say, in my many years of teaching piano, I became close to a family. I had an exceptionally gifted and talented student. 4th grade, this was a child who gobbled up music. Her parents' money was no problem. I noticed suddenly in 4th grade she started coming, she could barely keep her eyes open during practice, and circles under her eyes. She had a private batting coach, a private pitching coach. Oh. She was in ballet, she had voice lessons, horseback riding lessons, violin and piano. And her parents wanted to give her anything. For some reason, they couldn't see. They couldn't see. So I finally called them. I said, we need to meet. I said, your daughter is exhausted. She's doing too much. She's exceptionally talented, or I probably wouldn't say anything. They thanked me. They pulled her right out of, they asked her what